Hello and welcome to Columbia Business School Executive Education's Executive Webinar Series. I'm joined today by Professor Farrokhnia, Professor of Economics at Columbia Business School and the Columbia School of Engineering, to talk about blockchain, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies. We had a small technical issue while recording this webinar and did not capture the first minute of the original broadcast. Please accept our apologies and enjoy this recording of today's webinar.
The complication of, our lives, thanks to technology, in a way, could be interpreted for both good or bad. Obviously, technology is affecting every industry, some more so than others. But in financial services world, we are in a position where the application of all these complex matters are creating opportunities that not only need to be understood by technologists who are on the ground doing it, but more importantly for the corporate leaders, pretty much all of you, whether you are a consultant or a banker or a professional in financial services, healthcare, board members, CEO, and so on and so forth. So I am of a belief that these topics, for those of you in the audience, need to be learned from the top down as opposed to the ground up. And the analogy I like to use is that you do not need to know, at least at the beginning, all the intricacies of all the technology nuances of how, let's say, a Bitcoin wallet is created and the mathematical formulas behind and theories behind public-private key encryption technologies and so on and so forth. But just like a general contractor that needs to know how a house gets built, from the top down, that's the role I feel it would be best suited for you. That general contractor obviously perhaps is not up to date in terms of the latest code when it comes to the wiring and the plumbing of the structure being built. But they have a very good overview of all the pieces that go into building this home, and they can bring in experts, whether they're plumbers or electricians, to enable the building of the house. I feel like the same holds true for all of you. So in that vein, we have built this program and this two-day seminar happening on October 23 and 24 at Columbia Business School. And on your screen, you can see the link to the event site, as well as our brand new FinTech program, which was launched very recently, and it strives to sit at the intersection of academia and practice in financial services and beyond. But also for those of you who are kind enough to give us your time, we are including a special discount code, the discount webinar 54. If for the first 30 of you to sign up for the event, you can take $1,000 off your single ticket purchase. So I hope you take advantage of it as well. So to give you an overview of how our thinking evolves around demystifying these topics for those of you in the audience who may not have technical background or have a limited engineering capabilities and so on. We looked at this space from multiple perspectives, and we were able to narrow down truly the foundational topics that you need to learn and you need to know in order to fully grasp how all the pieces of ecosystems in the blockchain and cryptocurrencies and digital token worlds operate, and how they interconnect, and what's the interoperability, and how they would enable us to do and monetize some of the initiatives that in the past are either impossible to do or we had no venue to monetize them. So the sequential topics that I would suggest you embark on in learning, and as I mentioned at the end of a webinar, we'll be emailing you a series of suggested books or readings with a disclaimer that, again, there is not a whole lot of good primers for those with no tech backgrounds. Obviously, you can go online and do a search of what is blockchain or a blockchain primer, and many hits come up, but they're either too short or too long or too technical or written by engineers for engineers, or typically by someone who's trying to sell you something. We here, obviously, being at Columbia Business School, we strive to give you the most unbiased content and be able to empower all of you with the knowledge needed to understand all these topics. So the first and foremost area you need to understand is essentially how distributed and centralized communication networks operate. In essence, in our summit, we'll talk about how internet itself works, the history and evolution of communication networks, the move from centralized to decentralized systems, and especially all the protocols required to run the systems. I'm sure you might have included a few in the parentheses, TCP/IP or IMAP or POP. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of these. But in case you haven't, these are some of the main protocols which are pretty much standard operating procedures that enable communications over the internet, whether it's to send and receive email, or for a data packet to travel through the pipelines of internet and go from one switch or router to the next, and how you get data request data from a server, and so on and so forth. And if you look at these acronyms, they all end in the letter P, and that P stands for protocol. So understanding protocols, it's quite important for reasons I'll allude to at the end of this list. And they also come into play in regard to when we talk about digital tokens, and especially those with utility functions. So there are some textbooks, some quite tech heavy on these topics, but nonetheless, we'll be sending you some information, and I'll be happy to entertain questions at the end when it comes to module 1 of these sequential topics. Then once you have embarked on this, you need to understand the world of encryption and cryptography. Since the dawn of human age, we have always been interested in being able to send or receive secret communications that cannot be intercepted, or if it's intercepted, cannot be read by the party who stole the information. And all the way back to the days of Roman Empire and Julius Caesar, we have methodologies developed that enable us to send secure information securely. But obviously, we are in a very modern age, and computers play an important role in encryption, and they're actually a foundational part of blockchain and cryptocurrencies to begin with. So having a good understanding of how these topics work, specifically around secure hashing and modular arithmetics, will enable you to understand the evolution of cryptography and application of it within the digital token and cryptocurrencies. Thankfully, here there are a lot more books, a lot of them quite accessible, and some really good journalists have done a really good job in doing kind of a storytelling of how encryption and cryptography came about. And we also will be sending you information on some of the more advanced topics. And obviously, in the 2-day seminar that I mentioned, we do a deep dive into all the applicable areas of cryptography and encryption in general, especially those applicable to blockchain. Once you have these 3 topics, damn cold, then you're empowered to kind of understand how what blockchain is and how it operates. So the very first paper on blockchain dates back all the way to '91, and kind of talked about the use of blockchain in terms of timestamping, i.e., how to create and link a series of digital assets. You can think of them as documents, Word documents, that are immutable and are forever linked together in such fashion that no one can go and backdate or edit a document that was set in time at the time of original authorship. So and once you understand the first 3 topics, understanding how blockchain operates is actually quite easy. So we'll be sharing you the original paper. I'll encourage you to read it. Again, it's not that hard to read. And once you have it, then you'll have a very good understanding of how blockchain operates within the digital currency framework. Digital currencies are nothing new. One of my colleague did a count, and going back all the way to mid 90s to late 90s. And he counted over 200 cryptocurrencies or digital currencies that came about, but it never got any traction. And there are a couple of issues prior to the advent of blockchain, especially as prescribed in the famous Satoshi Nakamoto paper in 2008, was the fact that we had the problem of trust. i.e. if you're in a brand new startup and you're enabling movement of money or assets of value, who would know about you and who would trust you? But more importantly, the notion of double spend. You can make a simple analogy that whenever you send an email over the internet with an attachment, you are not really sending the actual document, you're sending a copy of it. So the recipient is not getting the original document, just getting a copy of it. So obviously when it comes to money and transferring money over internet, we cannot have something of that sort, because then you can spend the same dollar for many times over. And that would be unacceptable. So the blockchain protocol enabled and pretty much solved many of the inherent problems that we had before. And hence the reason Bitcoin became one of the most prominent and most recognizable digital currencies, and the rest is history. So there are also a few books that we'll recommend reading on Bitcoin. Also, again, in the two-day summit that we'll use Bitcoin as a primary example of a digital currency that eventually worked. Obviously, it has its own quirks, and there are certain advantages and disadvantages to it. And obviously, this incredibly highly dynamic world. We had the recent forking of Bitcoin, so we'll discuss that, some of the limitations, some of the inherent strengths and weaknesses, and so on. But more importantly, we'll talk about some of the upcoming cryptocurrencies and digital tokens that have gotten a lot of press, some for good, some for bad. So hopefully we can empower those of you who are in a strategic advisory position, or as investors, whether on your own or with institutional investors, to kind of hopefully be able to understand what is good and what is bad, and separate the chaff from the wheat, and also be able to discern a lot of misinformation in this world. And the fact that obviously, I'm sure all of you have heard about initial coin offerings and all the excitements around it, whether for good or bad. So hopefully we can empower you with the right knowledge to make the right decisions in analyzing and understanding what's really happening in that world. We'll also dedicate good chunk of time on Ethereum and smart contracts. Ethereum, it's another protocol. I'm sorry, blockchain-based protocol with Ether being their cryptocurrency. But Ethereum, it's to a large extent highly programmable, especially when compared to Bitcoin, and that enables us to do a variety of things, including smart contracts, which are algorithmically driven contracts, and initial coin offerings, and do a deeper dive into digital tokens, especially those that have a utility functions. And I'll be happy to give you some examples for those of you interested in learning more about digital tokens. So in essence and in conclusion, we strive to look at this entire world of crypto, whether blockchain and cryptocurrencies and digital tokens, and figuring out a methodology, at least propose a methodology of sequential topics that a non-technical person could learn on their own, and be finally in a position to understand how all the pieces connect and how they interoperate, and obviously be in a position to have perhaps better client conversations, or for future strategic purposes, be able to make more informed decisions. So as I mentioned numerous times, we'll be sending via email a series of textbooks that I recommend. By all means, do not limit yourselves to those. But I felt it would be important to share with you at least some of our thinking and some of our finding in terms of a research on what it takes to demystify this very exciting world, which, even though it's technically complex, is not out of reach for those of you who may not have computer science or math background. So in conclusion, I would love to entertain questions. Once again, I posted the link to our event on the screen, as well as the link to a brand new program on FinTech at Columbia, program focused on applied projects and advanced research in FinTech, and as well as the discount code you all can use in case you're interested in attending our conference October 23, 24 at Columbia Business School. So with that, I'll pass it to Gershom, who will help us moderate the Q&A, or if there are any questions that you asked.
Yes, there are a couple of questions here related to the question of basically if, sorry, I'm just reading through a few to see if I can bundle some ideas here. We hear a lot about blockchain having implications for many industries, not just in the fintech. Can you speak for a minute to sort of, if there are highlights from that, your list of resources outside
Absolutely,
of the
yes, yes, indeed. Great question. So in the course itself, we'll talk about the application of blockchain, not just in financial services, but many other industries, whether it's real estate, energy, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Understanding of that, blockchain in essence allows you to create a ledger or a list of interlinked documents or digital assets that are immutable. Will allow you to do many things. For example, in energy, allows you to create mini grids and be able to connect multiple homes, let's say, that are using solar panels on their roofs to exchange, surplus electricity production amongst themselves without the need to go back to the utility. Or in healthcare, allows you to create immutable list of, let's say, medical appointments or records. For instance, the Veterans Affairs Department in the US has certain rules around how doctors in the system gets paid based on who they see. Obviously, there would be some incentive for a physician to go and backdate certain appointments or insert some appointments that did not exist or were fraudulent and get paid, for it, even though no services were rendered. And obviously, a blockchain would allow you to stop something like that happening. But more importantly, we can build protocols, we can build systems that enables the monetization of the system for those who built it, whereas before there was no way to do it. Just to give you a silly example, IMAP and POP or POP are essential to email delivery across the internet, but none of us knows the heroes, in essence, who were able to build it. And most of them were either government employees or were in academia. So they pretty much, for them, this was more of a volunteer effort. Whereas in today's world, with the technology and the systems that we have at our disposal, we could build protocols such that it would enable anyone to do whatever comes to imagination, but be able to launch and share in the wealth. And also new ways of raising capital. There was the famous experiment in which you could pretty much create a crowdsource venture capital model. Imagine a venture capital firms without any GPs, where the decisions are made by the majority of those who commit money, and this would be highly democratic, and so on and so forth. So even though the experiment was kind of a failure, it was a bit of a hack, and we'll cover this in depth in class, and you can read about it online. But it was a good start, and showcased the possibility of this in many realms.
So we have a number of questions here. This is sort of a big question, but can you speak to a little bit of what it is specifically that governments and central banks, why they've shown so much resistance to cryptocurrencies? And then a lot of people are asking about some sort of global perspective, why different countries sort of have varying levels of regulation and acceptance.
Yes. Well, obviously, I'm not a regulator, so I cannot speak on their behalf. But part of the issue, in my humble opinion, is just the complexity of the matter and the technical requirements that one needs to, have down cold to be able to regulate it. Part of it is also the notion of regulators ensuring that they're not stifling innovation by regulating it too soon or too early. You could also argue that by not regulating or at least providing guidelines, you're creating uncertainty. So both sides of the argument, I think are valid, and you could have a successful, defense of it either way. But also the complexity of the financial services systems in the US and the legacy and entrenched methods by which we used to conduct business typically tend to act as impediments, whereas in some other countries, especially in developing world, they may not be bound or to legacy systems, or the legacy systems may not be as entrenched as they are in the States. So by definition, they are more capable of just experimenting. And as I'm sure you've heard, you can go to Africa and you see how prevalent paying by one's phone is, and people trade minutes or use their phone, even though it's an analog phone, to conduct business. In the US, we still can't do that, to the extent that they have been doing for quite some time. So it's a combination of factors. But the more and more we interact with regulators, we understand that they appreciate the impact of it, and they want to stay on top of it. And to our delight, there are pockets of quite intense activity in understanding it and ensuring that it doesn't pose a threat to the system, and at the same token, they can foster innovation.
We've got a number of questions in the realm of security, but specifically for trying to sort of apply some of this in an actual business environment. What are the chief risks from a security standpoint in adopting cryptocurrency or blockchain technologies in your operations?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach to this issue. One, obviously, security. The other issue is identity. For those of you on Facebook, you know that one of the core strengths of Facebook, and the reason Facebook became Facebook, is that everyone was tied to just one identity, and that was their real identity. Whereas in Bitcoin world, you can have multiple identities. You can open up as many accounts. Obviously, nowadays when you do it through a company like Coinbase, they require a lot of identification papers so they know who you are, but that doesn't stop anyone from having multiple wallets, so to speak. Or you could be from somewhere outside the US and be in a less stringent regime and be able to hide behind multiple layers of identity, so no one will know exactly who you are. Also, the notion of disrupting one system in such a dramatic fashion. Blockchain in general hits the banks or financial institutions and at the core. So kind of a more measured approach perhaps is warranted. And the fact that right now they're mostly focused on using blockchain to reduce costs on back office operation, whether it's reporting or trade settlement or things of that sort that required a lot of manual labor before. Now we could do them in a highly automated fashion driven by algorithms, which enable much more accuracy and a lot faster settlement times and lot lower error rate. But lastly, the other impediment is just talent. Having good talent, both who understands the technology, also understand business, and are able to connect the dots about disparate worlds and understand both opportunities and risks.
All right, a couple of questions have come in about the relationship between cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular, and actual currencies, fiat currencies issued by governments, and what you see as the future of that relationship.
Well, humans are quite amazing beings. If you look at the behavioral economics and the implications of it, as applied within the world of cryptocurrencies, it's quite fascinating. When you look at the philosophical ideas behind Bitcoin per se, and how over time some of those you could argue that have been compromised, you realize that human ingenuity is truly boundless, whether for good or bad. So the trade-off, so to speak, in the fiat currency, kind of those issued by a central bank or central authority versus something like Bitcoin, which is truly decentralized to a large extent, and the advantages of disadvantages of each, and also the incredible high volatility of cryptocurrencies thus far, including Bitcoin, that they might change massive percentages from week to week, creates certain barriers to adoption. And some might argue that, when Bitcoin itself is having a bit of an identity crisis, i.e., should it act as a mean to store value, just like, a gold bullion? Or is it meant more as a currency that facilitates trades and payments? And after the forking of Bitcoin, you have two, groups then argued for one application more than the other, and the jury's still out. And there's some inherent also limits to what Bitcoin can do. For instance, in order to run a transaction on using your credit card, the transaction itself is probably takes more than a second or two, and from a computational perspective, it's very light. Whereas a Bitcoin transaction takes about 10 minutes to go through and be verified. And typically you have to wait an hour just to make sure, and takes enormous computing power. So, whether that can be overcome is obviously open for debate in the research and the cryptocurrency community. And the answer seems to be yes, but we're also in a kind of a very experimental phase. A lot of new initiatives, exploring all different angles of it, and undoubtedly some winners will emerge.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for one more question here. Let's see, let me find a good one here. So you've addressed a lot of the sort of elements of these questions. People have definitely asked things that have overlapped quite a bit.
And I should mention one thing I forgot to mention, that is, the value of Bitcoin is whatever the market decides to assign to it. It's not based on any actual physical good, for sure. And you could argue the same for fiat currency. So just please keep that in mind, when you think about Bitcoin or other digital currencies that are truly digital and not backed by any physical assets.
So from that, actually, there's a question that came in by email before the webinar about the relationship between sort of people's awareness, the global awareness of Bitcoin, and whether that, if we've seen that awareness grow, obviously, over the last few years, what effect that has had on adoption and use across industries.
Well, blockchain itself, it's gaining a lot more attention these days than ever before, which is a good thing, because it's a fundamentally paradigm shifting approach to many things. So, not until long ago, people used to confuse Bitcoin with blockchain. Obviously, they are not the same thing. One is the core technology and core foundation, and other one is a cryptocurrency that's partly based off of it, and developed through the application of it. So the adoption and and the things that, as I mentioned repeatedly, we can do with it are quite amazing. And sometimes people are coming up with certain use cases for these, but the industry hasn't caught up to it. So it's kind of developing something and waiting for the world to catch up to it. And the approach to it is quite different from country to country, or from regulatory regime to regulatory regimes. Obviously, the nefarious activities enabled by Bitcoin, in which someone sends you a secret code and they encrypt your hard drive and you have to pay them some Bitcoin in order to decrypt it, are the ones that grab the most attention for good reason. But there are also lots of good uses for it, and it just like any tools that ever invented by humans, it could be used for good or bad. I always make the analogy that a knife in the hand of a surgeon can save a life, in the hands of a murderer can take a life. And same thing here. But the story pretty much comes down to the fact that most, if not all, inventions found applications that were beyond the imagination of the original founder. I'll leave you with one last story, and that is, when Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, the killer application for phonograph, in his view, after doing some thinking and research, was that it would be the best vehicle to deliver sermons to people's homes. So you could be sitting at home and you can listen to any sermon that you want. But the killer app ended up being actually music. And that's true for a lot of inventions. So the future will tell us, what direction we're going to go, and we love to be part of the conversations. And through our program at Columbia and many other researchers, we are exploring this, and hopefully with more of you interested and engaged, you all would bring your expertise into it and make it a much richer discussion.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for joining us.